This morning, if you go ahead and open up your Old Testament text to Job, we're closing in on the final discourses and dialogues of Job, where there is some culmination to Job's personal experience, but also from the wisdom side, we begin to get answers to some of the questions. I wouldn't say that we're going to get answers to all of our questions. As we've kind of noted in the study, there's a whole lot that goes on here. But before we get into our study, let's go ahead and bow to Heavenly Father. We thank you for what you have given to us in wisdom, what you have given to us in life, what you support us with, not only in the upholding of the world, but in the offering of your Son for our redemption. Help us as disciples to be committed to the kingdom. Help us to be willing to share our hearts and our lives in service to redemption and glorification. And we offer this prayer in your Son's name. Amen. All right, so again, we're looking at Job as a full picture at this point almost, because we only have one more planned study inside the text for us. And we'll review a lot of these principles and concepts as we get to the close. But this is the God of creation answering Job's core questions in sometimes surprising ways. When we ask questions in life, a lot of times, we already have formulated what we want the answer to be. Our questions sometimes on a practical level are, I'm going to ask this question because I need to do X, so I need them to tell me Y. Because our goal is to get to Z. You know, I want to have this kind of telephone or telegraph circumstance where I don't know this, they're going to tell me that, so I can get to where I'm going. With Job, the story, with Job, the person, with God interacting with all of this, both inside the literature and the story and outside as God's fuller picture, we don't always get the answers that we want. We certainly don't get the neat, tidy, this is the easy, fits perfectly stuff when we're thinking about the complexity of Job's circumstances. There's a whole lot that goes on there that I really think is important for us to have quite a few mornings or evenings with your favorite caffeinated or non-caffeinated beverage, looking out and staring at your soul. You sit there and you just think about things. And you're just like, okay, I need to think about this a lot. Job really, as a text, puts us in that position because it's really easy to say, what if I was Job? What if I was in Job's family? What if I was one of Job's friends? Unlike some of the other historical texts that have some wisdom to it, it's a little harder for us to pretend to be a participant in the story. It's a further step away. Like, I don't think I could really imagine what it would be like to be Pharaoh. Certainly, Joseph is difficult, Moses is difficult, Abraham is difficult, but for some reason, I can look at Job and go, man, I can imagine some of that. But that's different than understanding it. And it's certainly different from experiencing it. Imagine one thing, understand a different experience. He's going through it in the largest sense. And so when we think about this passage that opens up for us, and we start first in chapter 40, verse 1, it reads, "Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it." That's the Lord speaking to Job. Job's answer is this. It begins verse 3. "Then Job answered the Lord and said, Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer twice, but I will proceed no further." That right there encapsulates the reason why we classify Job to a degree as wisdom literature. because that's wisdom right there. That's practical, applicable wisdom. We've already acknowledged that Job had every right to question, right? He can ask those questions. Some of Job's questions move from questions, with a question mark at the end, to statements, period. Where he makes declarations about his character, his circumstances, and at times, his questions and statements also move to accusations towards his friends, towards questioning why God would do that to him. And one of the things I read recently as I was preparing for class was a challenge of Job is thinking that he is the center of the story. That everything is about Job. Raise your hand if you felt that feeling in life where you feel like everything is about you. I think that's a universal thing. And it's not like, oh yeah, kids feel that way all the time. We feel that way all the time. When somebody's circumstances causes an accident ahead of us, driving anywhere, who made me late? Why would they do that to me? Did the person who had the accident plan your delayed arrival based on that? Like, no. But do we feel that way? That's our first feeling. So we can kind of catch that. But Job is in that circumstance where he believes this is all about him. And the story partially sets it up for us that way too. Because what does the accuser, the father of lies, the devil, say in part as the story begins?
You build a hedge around him.
You build a hedge around him. Because God says, have you considered my servant Job? You build a hedge around him. But that primes us to think the story is about Job. It's only about Job. Everything's about Job. And Job believes that to be true too, but we're finding out that, hey, wait a minute. Job isn't the only one on the planet. And maybe Job has the unfortunate circumstance to not only be a human being, which at times feels unfortunate, not only be involved in the story of God's teaching of us, but be useful in a way that he doesn't like. You ever been good at something, but you don't like doing it? Like you're really good at a thing, but you're like, I'd rather really not do that thing. You think about that for a second, be like, good at something, but you don't want to really be doing it, but it's really useful. My usual standard joke is I'm really good at getting things off the top shelf, right? I don't really mind because there's no weight to it. I'm not very good at getting stuff off the bottom shelf. It's an invisible world to me. Nothing exists down there. But there are things that I'm pretty good at, but I'd just rather not do them. It'd be a thing I'd like to do something else. For all kinds of reasons. Job is being used as something that's very good at something that not only does he not want to do, the experience of doing it is horrible. He is serving all humanity in teaching us aspects of God that we may not have learned in any other way. And Job is going to be learning this when he commits to being silent. I've already said what I can say. There's nothing else that I can really add because, again, verse 2, shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it. When you survey the text of Job, there's only a few times where Job is really written this way. He's a fault finder. God calls him that. What kind of term do you initially, just on a surface reading? I'm not quite sure off the top of my head of the translations of the text. They're pretty similar. But if you were called a fault finder, is that a good thing or a bad thing in your common English sense? Pretty much we think that's a bad thing. Why are you picking at it? Why are you always looking for the bad parts? Unless, what if that's your job, to be the fault finder? You know any accountants? What's their job? To point out that you can't do math as well as they can, or read as well as they can. Those are like two really important things. Or an engineer. Yeah, like it's a really super important. Inspectors. Some of you guys know Josh Gertler. You guys remember Josh? He works for the USDA helping with food safety. You want him to be a good fault finder, don't you? I absolutely do. I want to be really particular. If there's some sort of disease running through the U.S. food supply, I want Josh to be particular, annoying, like super pesty. Like that's what I want, because I would like to have a safe food supply. Kind of like, I feel like that's an important thing. An important thing to catch then is when we read a text like this, we read it with our own human eyes, and he is definitely not being accused of being the good kind of fault finder here. This is leaning towards, hey, you've made some accusations. Can you prove them? Can you substantiate them? And his response is, I got nothing more to say. Partially because we're going to find out he doesn't have the right point of view. And he uses a phrase, he calls himself light in weight, insignificant. The wisdom imaging that's taking place here is a scale. But I can't move the scale. There's not enough mass to me to change the outcome. And it's not just his arguments in play there, that he as a being cannot move the scale as compared to the other side. A note that I made a while back that I think is really kind of a clear thing here. This is a great biblical example of when silence is a step towards becoming more wise. When zipping your lips is the smart play. Because he stands before God and he says, zip. I think I should be quiet now. Second question, really important. If you were to reflect on your last week, your last month, or your last year, is there a specific point where better wisdom would have had you be quiet and just zip it and wait and listen? You don't have to answer the question with the details. This is one of those, I could probably think about that. It could be yesterday, but there's a key connection. We say, hey, Job did this in the most crucial conversation of his life. He did this. I should remember that. There's going to be a moment where that's going to be really important for me too. And maybe I can apply it more consistently, more effectively. There's a little note that's in my little subnotes that I took in a Bible class probably 30 years ago. Here is then what takes place underneath this big answer of Job, or God to Job. In essence, he's telling Job, you don't have the criteria or the qualifications to do my job. You don't have the positioning to do that. How many of you have ever, I know that at least a couple of us have done this, but I'm curious, how many of you have spoken at a funeral for someone you know? Not done the remarks, but got up and made a statement about, hey, I knew them when. In South Georgia, there's a lot more unstructured funeral participation, so the numbers are a little bit larger. I've done both roles, like probably every role at a funeral, except dying, I guess, at this point. I'm working on the last one. It'll happen eventually. Hopefully a little later than sooner. Don't have any control of that. But we think about funerals in a very unique way. We're very nervous about what we say there. Why are we afraid to speak at funerals? I can tell you, I'm afraid I'm going to cry. Like, that's my current context. That's first number one. Number two, I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. Like, those are my two big funeral fears. I'm going to cry, probably going to happen. I'm going to say the wrong thing. Also, probably going to happen. One of the most helpful things comes in part from this understanding of Job and God. It is not my job at a funeral to make any kind of decision on the outcome of the one who has passed. Independent of everything I know. Is there any way that I can preach in such a way to change the outcome of the destiny of the soul that has exited that body?
No.
Sorry, God. But do I want it to be different? Sometimes. Sometimes I do. And even if I was right, judging the outcome of that soul, and if I could somehow create a context where it'd be okay for me to try to pull the soul from one end of the outcome to the other, is that my job? What's the purpose of a funeral then, if I can't do the thing I'm afraid of somehow, stepping on some outcome in a weird way? Is it for the dead or for somebody else?
It's for the living motion.
It's for the living. And can I do any good there? Hopefully. I can try. Because my job is for the living. Now that may mean I say some things that are pretty direct and plain, but I'm also going to say things that are very supportive and encouraging to those who are grappling with grief. And maybe think deeply about what Paul writes to the church of Thessalonica and helping people grieve in a way that keeps them in hands with hope. We don't grieve as those who have no hope, we grieve as those who have hope. It's not just about the spiritual outcome of those who have passed, it's actually about us. But our hope is different. So we have a different role, a different spot there. So, with Job having to learn this big thing, remember, he had already declared how good he was. Job 31. It's Father's Day. We're not going to have a beat up the Father's Day sermon today. That's a standard Father's Day play for some preachers. Not going to have that today. Both Mother's Day and Father's Day were off this year on my cycle of when I speak directly on the subject. But how many of you fathers would love to have the Job 31 resume as your life? That's a pretty strong resume, right? Big declarations of morality, good, consistent behavior. I'll take it. I feel like it'd be a step up from where I'm trying to go. Like, I'm trying to get here, and Job's like way up here. Emotionally, that's how I feel. But God is telling Job, hey, guess what? None of this is your job. You're simply not qualified. And he begins to use some pictures that are really punchy in different ways. In chapter 40 and verse 8, would you discredit my justice? Condemn me that you may be in the right? This is a normal theological question we have when thinking deeply about God's justice. Question: when you think about the Old Testament, Genesis to the preaching of John, all of that, are there instances where God does a thing that you don't understand regarding the death of somebody? Where somebody dies, a human being dies, and you're like, I don't know why. Small children? Do small children die in the biblical witness? Due to things that God put in motion? Yeah. They do. They're citizens of some of the nations that get crushed because God says they need to be crushed. Is that a hard thing? Yeah. At what point do I have a right to question God's justice in that system?
No point.
I don't have a point, but do I ask the question? Yeah. So now that's probably one of the reasons why we get close to feeling like we can be Job, because we ask some of the same questions about others and ourselves. And don't always come with great answers. God is pointing him and pushing him to this, hey, you know what? This is where you're at. This is where we're at. This is where it is. In 9 through 13, there's some descriptions, imperatives in particular. Adorn yourself, unleash wrath, crush the wicked. These are all commands that Job can't fulfill. Can't do it. If you looked at someone and they're 25 years old and you said, I need you to grow 3 feet. Any way you want to interpret that sentence, by the way. Either 3 feet taller or grow 3 extra feet. Does that work? It doesn't work. It's the same thing in concept that Job is being asked by God, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you command? Verse 14, well, okay. Then I will acknowledge that your own right hand can save you. That's really the core of the entire block of information that goes back to chapter 38 in the text. This is, hey, I'm God and you're not. It is similar-ish, not the same, to when the parent looks at the child and says that magic phrase. That's totally okay to say. What's the magic phrase? Because I said so. Now, we usually employ it carelessly because we're tired and we're done with the questions and we want to stop answering the questions. But I want you to think back now Job's interaction with God in this whole story. And Job has all these questions. And Job begins to get the answers in chapter 38. By chapter 40 and 41, it is in essence a distilled form of, I'm God, you're not, and this is happening because I said so. How do we feel about that answer? Do you like it?
Depends on whether we're giving it or getting it.
Okay. Les is going with the straight facts. Depends whether we're giving it or getting it. We don't like it as adults when someone says, because I said so. We didn't like it as children when adults or authority figures said, because I said so. But when God tells it to Job, we agree with what God says, right? I agree that this is a logical, realistic view of the disparity of power, wisdom, and understanding between God and man. But do we like it? We ask the more important question, do we accept it? That's a harder one, though, than liking it. I think a fair answer would be consistent for all of us, we're trying to. And incrementally, we can get better at it. Unfortunately, we can also get worse at it, too. Like, we can go back and forth on our willingness and ability to accept some of this. But I think it really does illustrate the complexity of what's going on in this larger aspect of what Job is trying, as a text, is trying to teach us. That God, as God, can do things, and we don't have to understand them, even when we want to acknowledge that God has the right to do so, has the ability to do so. That's hard. Like, at a fundamental, basic level, there's nothing that comes back to that and goes, hey, I'm okay with that, because these are significant moral issues. And really, if you want to kind of get intertextual a little bit and think about the bigger picture of the New Testament and other stories, there's really only one person who could have answered this question differently. But he had a different answer to the question in Luke 22:42, not your will but mine. Jesus actually was in a situation where, as an incarnate human, God made flesh, he could have given a different answer to this question. And actually he then displayed the penultimate, or the highest level of deference, and said, not my will, but yours. And so if you're going to put the pieces together, you could say it this way. What Job needed to trust, Jesus embodied in the fullest sense. And it kind of also begins to synthesize the turn in theology that Job, his friends, and all of us need to capture, which is even Job, to a degree, came with this transactional understanding of God. If I do what's right, then God will bless me. if I'm cursed, I had to have done something wrong. But wait a minute, I haven't done anything wrong, so why am I cursed? A transactional model. Job needed to trust God that there was something beyond himself that for whatever reason needed to be explored. And then there are two important but weird-ish sections that come up. The first one is this weird phrase, behemoth. And I say weird because of a language issue, not because we can't conceptually understand some of these things. There are certain words in Hebrew and in Greek and other languages that we don't always know exactly what the English 21st century similar thing is, where I can say this is that. And Leviathan, Behemoth, there's another phrase. Some of your Bibles have the word unicorn in it, older translations, because they just didn't know what it was, and so that's what they would put there. And they're uncertain or unclear words. Certainly not the narwhal in the Old Testament text, because that was a land roving creature, and the narwhal is the unicorn of the sea, just in case you know. It's a single horn unicorn that swims in the oceans. But behemoth to us, we go, well, what is that? We spend all our time figuring out what the thing is, and we forget, what is this big critter supposed to be teaching me? There's not a really good answer specifically to say it's this genus and species of a critter that we don't have access to anymore, and I can say it's definitively and clearly this thing. Because it's unclear, and that's why they say uncertain, might be, could be. But I can tell you that inside the way in which God has this inspired text recorded for us, particularly thinking about verses 15 through 24, whatever the behemoth is, Job can't master it. Do you guys know statistically what the most dangerous animal is on the planet? Causes the most human fatalities per critter encounter? White-tailed deer is our theory. Could be. Certainly auto accidents, and they're dangerous that way. The standard answer is the hippo. How many of you guys are scared of hippos? Why are we not scared of hippos? And actually, I agree with my neighborhood and deer. They're basically a menace, and I think they're going to jump out at me every single second. They're beautiful when they're not messing with the cars, but otherwise, they also apparently are beautiful on the table. Those are good, moments for them. But why are we not scared of hippos? Because we ain't got no hippos here. I haven't run from a hippo in my life. It's an option. Certainly, if that occurred, I just got to run faster than the other people running from the hippos, and it should be all right. But I've seen them in wild animal parks and the zoos. They're pretty terrifying when they decide to move, right? Elephant's pretty terrifying when it decides to move. I'm not going to mess with that. That's clearly a creature that if it decided to be an aggressor, I'm done for. I'm not going to win that. I just got to be quicker, or in a different continent than where the elephant and the hippo reside. That's the image that the wisdom literature is trying to get to us. Not that there's this creature out there that I can't define, that there's a creature or creatures on the earth that you can't master, that you can't tame. Anyone want to be a great white shark trainer? That sounds like a great position to be in. I'm wild at times with certain things. I'm not swimming with great white sharks. I just don't feel like being food. That's not how my ecosystem works. I am not part of that participant in that regard. Wouldn't think I could train one. And yet, in some contexts, you can do things to train certain animals that are incredibly dangerous. But what God is saying again is that there are creatures on the earth that Job would be aware of that he knows he can't master. He knows that he cannot tame. And this is a tie-in back to the order of things in Genesis 1. All the land animals are created on the sixth day. And really, it's basically saying, in plain terms, look at Behemoth, which I made, as I made you, by the way. Both are created by the same Creator God. And really lay into this principle that God made the thing that terrifies us. And he made us too. You can even localize it. What are the odds in the property that the church owns right now that there is a black rat snake? Georgians, I don't want to terrify the people who are afraid of snakes, but those who are raised in Georgia, is it 100% or close to it? Close to it. I don't know why in Georgia we do this, but we put all the pine needles around a house. What do rat snakes like to live in? Pine needles. They love it. It's feeding ground for them. Now, the corollary question, who's scared of rat snakes? It's okay to admit it. Some of us are just terrified by them. I grew up around gardener snakes, and anything that's not poisonous, venomous, is just weird. I'm not really terrified, it's just weird. God made that. There are things that terrify me that walk this earth. God made them too. That is actually the thing that we're supposed to get from that text, that God made that. He made it and us. That then should make us think a little bit differently about not only the things that scare us, but even the forces of creation that scare us too. When we talked about thunder and the skies and the universe last week, sometimes that scares us. God made that. It's God's handiwork at play. Even if I tremble. And then there's another one that happens in the same text here. Leviathan. Another fancy word. I love the fancy words at times. Big fan. But again, it's a little obscure. We don't know exactly what it is. We just know it's big. But there's a description that's side-saddled with it that is right in the text here. It is described, or Leviathan, as being king over all the sons of pride. So that should force us to have an introspection, to think for a second, and ask ourselves this question. At what point in the last 6 to 12 months did you have some level of humble pie served to your table? That's an introspective question. You don't have to raise your hand or answer. But it probably happened. Let's go back 12 years. I'm picking numbers out of the sky. 12 years. Last 12 years. How is that dish of humble pie? Because in 12 years, you probably had at least one dish of humble pie. You could have a small sliver sometimes. Sometimes you eat the whole pie. That then is also, just as Behemoth serves one purpose, Leviathan serves this purpose for Job. How about some humility, Job? Are you Leviathan now? That you are the one who is now able to humble all the others? You've got Behemoth, who terrifies you. But Leviathan is described as being 3 times that size. He is pictured, with whatever he is, as being fire-breathing, with impenetrable scales, weapon-proof. No human can pierce or subdue him. That's the way the text presents him. Is whatever the Leviathan is, again, an obscure word, we're not quite sure what human or what modern creature would map to it. There's some modern creatures that spit fire. There's some modern creatures that have really tough skin. There's many that are very aggressive and can avoid being stabbed. But whatever that is, you want to mess with it? You feel like you can go up against Leviathan or Behemoth and make a play at it? How tough are we? We're pretty tough. Humans are incredibly fragile. We can just like hurt ourselves getting out of bed some mornings. We turn our heads the wrong way at certain points in age, and all of a sudden our day's ruined. We can trip over walnuts or seed pods, and then we're done for like a month and a half recovering. We can stick our feet in gopher holes at the peak of our physical capacity and be done for 6 months as our ligaments and our ankles remend themselves. I've been through that experience personally. It's horrible. Gopher holes. What are they doing? But in the end, we still think that, like Job, we can subdue Behemoth and fight Leviathan, who is the king over all the sons of pride. Leviathan here then is the embodiment of pride to the ultimate level, the highest form of it, whatever it may be. Particularly in this case, evil's seemingly unconquerable power, and he's still a created thing. He's still something that is somehow in the greater picture of God. And there's a side note that's super important theologically. Both Behemoth and Leviathan are defeated, but they're not defeated in the ways that we would think Job is leaning towards, and this argument seems to suggest. Because Leviathan, the king of pride, is not defeated by overwhelming force. He's defeated by a crucified serpent. A servant who offered himself in opposition to human wisdom so that the rulers of this age could be defeated. All that is in that idea is crushed in Christ. Whatever the physical creation was, whether it was worldly or otherworldly, was defeated by Christ on the cross. And that's that full picture that's super important for us to capture. And it is part of what Job is trying to teach us as a text. Try to get us to kind of think about. There's a literary connection that takes place too, which connects a couple good questions. Job 3 and verse 8 shows that Job once invoked those who rouse Leviathan to curse his birth. Now God describes Leviathan. What does that irony then make you think about? And has Job learned anything? I think he has. Because remember, Job 40 and 41 is this whole section of the text saying, hey, who are you? Can you command? Can you arouse Leviathan? Can you judge man? He called out to one of the great powers of the created existence. Tried to command it to curse the day of his birth. And God basically is saying, no, you can't do that. You don't possess the power to do so. And we can come to that conclusion again, still not knowing all the edges of the mystery of what a behemoth is and what the Leviathan is in its full sense. We just know that, one, God made it. And two, Job can't master either of them. That then leads us to the inevitable XYZ conclusion that we don't like. I'm not God. I can't be like Job and think that I'm God. That means I have to trust and accept things, even when they're a mystery to me. Particularly, perhaps, when I don't really understand. And I think Job has learned that. I think this is a good point where you can say, this is the moment where Job's wisdom starts to develop. This last redirections from God. Job had good moral, upright status, but he lacked understanding. And maybe you could say pretty fairly that he wasn't humble. Because God basically implies that through this dialogue. Still wouldn't have changed the outcome. But it also may lead towards another level of question. We've thought through all of this so far under thinking that this text is so that we can learn these lessons. I asked this myself when I was kind of putting the pieces together a little bit. Did Job need to learn this lesson about his pride? How many want to go to the school of Job and learn things the Job way? Really don't want to. But how many of us are the kind of people that if we need to figure out if a fence is electric, what method do we use?
Touch it.
Yeah, and then the wise farmers amongst us, what method do they use?
Walk away from it.
No, they get somebody else touch it. Touch that fence, see if it's charged. I've been both of those circumstances. Touch the fence, yeah, it's electric. Have someone else touch it, it's electric. And you say, well, why would we do that? How many people in your house it's their job to test and see whether the milk is good or not, and it's not your job? There's somebody in your house whose sole job is to be the milk tester.
It ain't mine.
I have adopted a new theory. If you think it's bad, it's bad. It's bad. Even if, for some reason, I feel like it'd still be all right. Like, if you've already decided, why am I a second voice in this decision to determine whether this milk that could cause my stomach to rot out is bad? It's no different. We're putting ourselves in this position of learning the Jobin way. And we should probably try to figure out other ways to learn, but we don't. In the little stuff. But here we have the biggest issue we can have. We'll look at this some more next Sunday as we wrap up some of this. And put all these pieces together into kind of a final synthesized form to kind of lock all the information in and make some good application. But it's really important to kind of catch that in our purpose and plan in life, remember that the things that we are often fighting against, we're not going to win because we're not the right one to be fighting them. I can't win against Behemoth. I cannot win against Leviathan. Christ has successfully subdued both of them. And God controls all of it. And I think that's probably a great middle takeaway for us this morning. Thanks, everybody.